I'm informed we've gone live on Facebook, which is quite amazing and awesome. I'll do an introduction, then I'll bring you into it. So, good afternoon to one and all. Today, I'm happy to be joined by a long-time friend and somebody who I've wanted to bring you for ages. What can I say about him? Well, growing up in Northern Ireland had his challenges and he showed early signs of sensitivity. He chillingly predicted a death at only 14 years of age and a subsequent bomb incident a couple of years later. This ability deepened and he honed it and was able to conduct mediumship readings initially for himself and then for others. Our paths first crossed on a Reiki Forum in circa 2003, where he used his clairvoyance to facilitate healing work. These were magical times and we remain in contact with other kindred spirits to this day. Those experiences led to a desire to enter the field of psychology, where he remains to this day. We'll be getting into these stories and much more. Please give it up for Dr. David Morrison, everyone. David, thank you for being a guest on this show. I'm so excited.
Thank you, Danny. I'm so glad to be here after all these years. It has been years ever since you started doing these. I was going through some of our old messages earlier, actually, and I think it goes back like 5-6 years. I was sending you a message saying, we really must do an interview soon. But life just got very busy at my end and we never got around to it. So finally got it.
That's right. But at least the Wi-Fi is holding out now, so you're clear and it's fluid, it's fluent, which is great. I want you to start, David, by sharing with the viewers what it was like growing up as a child.
It was quite the time and place to grow up, to be honest with you, because, I mean, I'm sure most of the folks watching this will know all about the troubles in Northern Ireland. And then I found myself in the middle of that, born in 1977. So I grew up in the worst, that sort of early to mid 80s was the worst part of the troubles. And I grew up right at the edge of the border. So perhaps one of the worst places to grow up. And which basically meant that there was a target on my family's back. So, as a kid, I remember as a kid, my dad would train us how to check the car for bombs and things like this. And it was a normal kind of practice that as soon as it would get dark, you had to pull the curtains and you couldn't have the lights on and the curtains open because then people could shoot in through the windows at you. So these were the kind of, and if you dared to do that, if I went near, if for example I went into an empty room and turned on the light and hadn't at night and hadn't pulled the curtains, I hear maybe my mum and 2 aunts screaming at me to pull the curtains. So that was a kind of a typical example of what it was like to grow up as a kid then. And obviously the whole sectarian divide as well, that you had to sort of police yourself socially and only hang out with certain kinds of friends and keep to your own ethnic group. It was such a weird time. And obviously when I think back to that time, I often say this actually when I look back at that time as well, I realize now it was one of the first bits of my training as a psychologist, because you can't live in that kind of environment and get out of it intact, So I was surrounded by, in the extended family, we had all sorts of issues going on, trauma-related problems, schizophrenia, drinking problems, depression, body issues, you name it. It was all going on around me. And I always felt like I was on this little roundabout in the middle of that, Everything else was going on around me, but I was, relatively unscathed, nothing really happened to me directly. But it did go on around me. So that's the kind of early life that I had. So it was, pretty mad.
Yeah, and you've got siblings, haven't you? I seem to remember you've got a brother and you've got a sister as well, is that right?
Yeah. I know big brother. I've got a big brother. So yeah, it was the 2 of us, and we grew up in a house with my mum and dad. And when I was young as well, we had our typical Irish house, grandparents, couple of aunts, maybe an uncle or 2 thrown in there for good measure. So it was a really full house. But that was also part of the, kind of part of my training in a way as well, because one of the things you learn, as a family and as a community going through that, is that one of the best ways to survive the really difficult challenges that life throws at us all, to be honest with you, whether it's a civil conflict or a marriage breakdown or a loss of something, whatever it is, it's to come together. social support, you know. So that large extended family and that really tight community, you know, was such an important part of getting through that. And that's still a part of, even now, even as a psychologist, that's so deeply ingrained in the way that I think about things. So when I think about or work with people individually, I never individualize their problems or their solutions. You know, I always think about how the system around them has contributed to the challenges that they face, and how it can contribute as well to the, you know, to the solution.
Yeah, and I know you had early sort of signs that you were sensitive. I know you mentioned the incident was 14 years old. Did you have an inkling even before you were 14 that you were kind of sensitive and you could perhaps perceive things that others didn't or couldn't?
A little bit, a little bit. I remember when I was maybe 5 or 6, I had this premonition that I was going to be in a car accident in my 20s. Which made my 20s a little bit interesting when I was driving, of course. And then Julie, of course, when I was, I think 29, I finally did have a car accident, just a little one, thankfully. But yeah, when I was a little kid, I had that premonition. And probably the biggest one was when I was about 14. Because it was such a powerful instant. I think I know I've told you about this before, Danny, but I'll share it with others. I was doing, from memory, I was doing a table quiz in the local community hall, I think it was. And we'd asked the local headmaster, who was something of a community leader, to come and present the prizes at the end of it. And so at the end of it, we were all wrapped up, and I was packing up, and he comes over and he shakes my hand. And I can still remember I was on the stage and he was down below on the floor. And I remember leaning down to shake his hand. And as soon as we shook hands, it was like this bolt of electricity went through me. And in that electricity it felt like there was a message, and that he was saying to me, my time is done, now it's over to you. And that made a lot of sense to me at the time, because they were, you know, in the community, they were beginning to kind of earmark me as a potential future community leader. You know, I seem to have a bit of sense. I seem and a few ideas about what to do. So folks are beginning to position me for that in the future. So it made a lot of sense that he would be looking at me in that way. But very clearly in that message was the sense that his time was up, you know. And it really shook me. And I went home that night and I said to my mum, I don't think I'm going to see that man alive again. And she was, what are you talking about? You know, I think he just retired, so he'd only been in his 60s, I guess. He wouldn't have been an old man in any respect. And but I was adamant, you know. And then the next morning, I still remember this pretty clearly. The next morning, it must have been maybe a Saturday, we went breakfast, and my mum got a phone call to say that this man had dropped dead at breakfast that morning. And I still remember she took the call and she came into the living room. And I've never seen, my mum she had a pretty good poker face, to be honest with you, but I've never seen her look so rattled as she did that morning, because of course I predicted it. So she was coming in obviously a little bit stunned by the news, but also remembering what I'd said the night before. So that was probably the first instant. And then what made it powerful was the fact that I shared it, you know. So it wasn't just some, you know, some fantasy that I made up after the event. You know, before it happened, I had said, I think this might happen, you know. So that was the first. And then a couple of years later, I had this, I can't really call it a dream. It was something between waking and the dreams yet. This warning that was really, really, really clear to me. It said, all is in danger. And the message wasn't just like one or two members of my family. No, it said all your family's in danger. And I remember waking up from that and just being like, my mind was blown, like, what could this be? Because of course, in that time and place, you know, that it was possible for my whole family to be in danger, you know. And so for the next couple of days, I was going around the days trying to think about what it could be that was going to happen. And then a couple of days later, there was a bomb attack on my hometown. And I think in total about 5 of my family members were near the vicinity of that bomb. And by sheer luck, none of them were hurt. And it was sheer luck because, for example, in my mum's case, she should have been driving past where the bomb went off, except she took a different route that day. And in my aunt's case, she should have been, in her own words, sat on the toilet with the toilet door coming through me, except she decided to stop to get milk on her way home from work. One of my cousins crossed the road when she heard the detonator, so she missed it. One of my other cousins had his face next to the window, and it was the only window in the house that didn't break. You know, and there were a couple of other stories like that as well from the extended family. So, and that was only maybe 2 or 3 days after I'd had this warning. You know, so that was also a bit of a sign, a very early sign that I seemed to have access to information that others didn't.
Yeah, so you'll have been 14 the first time, roughly 16 the second time. How do you process this? I don't know. I just can't imagine living in that, like, essentially a potential war zone, isn't it? And you've got to be, but you're not hyper vigilant at times, even after that event.
Yeah, it'd be normal. I mean, if you weren't hypervigilant in that environment, I'd be wondering what's wrong with you, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, because you're constantly on the lookout for stuff. And it's funny, even now, 20 odd years after, in fact, 25 years as of yesterday, since the ceasefire, even yet, I can feel that hypervigilance kicking in when I'm in a big city, or if I find myself in a slightly dodgy area of town, suddenly it kicks in, and I'm beginning to scan for risks, you know. But I think at the time, I didn't really, I wasn't one of those kids like some sensitive kids are, where it was an ever-present thing. So it was like every now and then I would get this. So that kind of, in a way, gave me a break from it. So I didn't need to really confront that. It was only then when I got a little bit older, probably in my late teens, if I recall correctly, when I started doing, I actually, at the time I called them brain exercises. I can't remember if I ever mentioned this to you, but I used to do these, what I call brain exercises, which I know
that rings a bell, yes.
And it was meditation, but this was like pre-internet, you know. I had no idea about meditation or spirituality or any of that stuff. I was living in the middle of nowhere in Ireland, didn't know anything about that stuff. So I was essentially meditating as a late teen without realizing it. And then as a result of that, I realized this kind of sensitivity began to be more constant, you know, and I'd find myself standing. I remember one of the first occasions I was standing in a post office queuing, and I suddenly realized I could pick up stuff from everyone in the queue, you know. I could kind of feel what they were feeling and had a sense of what they were thinking about. And then that snowballed, I guess, and then became more and more constant.
Yeah, and how is it for you today? If you fast forward to the now, is it still something is intermittent? Is it something you can turn on and off? Is it something you can do on command? How is it for you?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, actually, because you know, how has it evolved like that? And in those days, there was no on-off switch. And this is a fairly familiar story when you speak to people who've been through this journey. You know, at the start, it's just a floodgate, and it is too much. I mean, you a lot of folk in those early stages, including myself, I mean, you struggle to function around, you know, in a town centre or something like this with hundreds of people, and you can feel everything. It's too much. So over time, you develop ways of turning off and on. So that's pretty much how it is for me. You know, so at the moment, I only work as an academic psychologist at the moment. I work for a couple of universities in the UK. So it's not turned on there. There's no particular need for it there.
No.
But then there are scenarios in my life, like helping friends and things like that, where I can turn it on like a switch, and suddenly it's there. And that's the thing I love, that I can sort of forget about it even for a few hours, a few days. But then as soon as the switch goes on, it's there, just like a radio, I guess.
Yeah, it's the opposite for me. It's I can't do it anymore. I was asked to do a reading some months ago for the first time in ages, and I just couldn't do it. I got some rookie stuff, you know, like picking up conditions, like, you know, arthritis in the hand, rookie stuff, and a few random bits. But but that was it. And I thought, wow, I can't do this anymore. So it's weird. Yeah, it's interesting. So I was wondering, how it is for you, which clearly it is something you can still utilize as and when somebody presents. That's really good.
When it's needed. Yeah, not when. I mean, there have been times in recent, like if I'm under a lot of stress, has been the case in recent years. Then it's not reliable. I can't necessarily switch it on that way. But when all things are equal, it's there like a radio. I could just switch on.
That's cool. That's interesting. Then you got into Reiki healing, didn't you? That's kind of how our paths connected initially. SRI. I was doing a search for it before we went live, and I don't think the site is even there anymore. It's gone. It's vanished. The last time I was on there, it was full of spam, and it was quite upsetting to see how it sort of gone downhill. But yeah. And do you ever use healing these days?
Yeah, for myself and others. Yeah. For myself, if I'm struggling with something, I'll use it. And then likewise, a friend recently was struggling with something, some digestive problems, so I was helping him out with that. So yeah, it's still there. It's kind of like it's in this little box of tools over here that I can just pick up and use whenever I need it. But for me, the Reiki was what really kind of put the rocket booster underneath everything, because up until that point, everything was, it was there. I was sensitive, but there wasn't very much power to it, and there wasn't very much control to it. And then all of a sudden, when I got into Reiki, I realized it just blew the roof off, So suddenly I realized, and this was the big change for me. And like previously, I could be in a post office, like I said, and I could pick up what people were thinking and feeling. Now, I could pick up somebody's photo and look at their eyes, and I could suddenly get a sense of their personality, what they're going through right now, what they've been through in the past, what they're going to go through in the future. That was incredible. And then not long after that, I realized that's when the mediumship door opened properly, and in a very similar way to the living. I was able to look at a photo and make a connection in 5 or 10 seconds, and then because I kind of wandered into all of this stuff, nobody had trained me on how to do this even yet. I've never seen, to my knowledge, I don't think I've ever seen anyone else do energy work, whatever healing or intuition or mediumship. So I found my own way, and then after the event, I realized this is a little bit different. I almost spoke to it. So with the mediumship, with the sensitivity for a start, I could just pick up a photo and just whatever you wanted to know about that person, I could tell you pretty much. And then with the mediumship, it was as I became aware later, most folk, they kind of open the door and then somebody comes in through them pretty much. But I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not a very patient person. This isn't really how it worked for me. So what I would ask, I eventually, friends would start asking me to help them out with stuff, and then friends of friends, and it's kind of snowballed from there. And what people would do is they just bring me a photo, and I could connect with the photo in 5 or 10 seconds or thereabouts. And then it was just like a normal conversation. Well, maybe not quite like a normal conversation, but from my point of view, it was a normal conversation. It's just I had to repeat one side of it to the other folks, and it could go on for hours. It would go on until I dropped. I think the longest one I ever did was 5 hours or something, and I remember I slept the whole of the next day. I was so tired.
Yeah. So, yeah, it can exhaust you. I remember doing, multiple readings, and then, as you say, the next day you can't lift your head off the pillow. It's just horrendous.
It's really
yeah. So presumably, when you were doing the healing work, especially over distance, you see things like clairvoyance, and so you can. As I remember, I was having some pain years ago, and you were doing some healing on me, and you said I had a hole, like what looked like a hole in my solar plexus, and you were doing like some kind of healing work to bring the chakra back up into balance and filled up, and then I was loads better afterwards as well. So it's really useful, isn't it, to be able to see and be guided to the areas that need work. Fascinating. You just got to trust, haven't you, and get out of the way and allow yourself to be guided. Yeah,
exactly right. Get out of the way. Yeah, it's let trust in the process. What I often say. With the healing work, it comes. It's very visual for me. If I close my eyes and think about a person, then I'm kind of mentally scan them, then I can kind of see where there's knots and kinks and holes and whatever, and I can work with that. Or if I kind of get the sense that their energy's being like they have an energy vampire in their life, then I'll pick that sort of stuff up too. So it's really useful. I mean, I use that. I remember with some people, I was able to use that to pick up issues with joints, like this left knee's bothering you, and pick up stuff with some of the organs as well. So it's quite good for preempting issues as well, I find.
Yeah, good. So do you have any memorable stories before we move on to psychology with healing or mediumship? Obviously, you won't divulge names and things, but just any memorable or funny stories?
Well, I remember there was one. There's so much the mediumship. To be honest, I love the mediumship. I don't remember because by the end of it, I was so tired that, I don't think, even years later, people might send me a message and say, that was really helpful, what you said about my mom or dad or whatever. And I'd have no memory of it at all. But I think there was one that I remember the most because it was, for the most part, you're just relaying information. Or at least that was my experience. Yeah. And there were a couple of stories that I remember. There was one because I always had the kind of scientific instinct as well. So when I was doing it, I was always at the back of my mind. I was thinking to myself, am I just hallucinating here? Basically, am I making all of this up, or is this actually happening? So one of the ways that I did it, I would take off my glasses and cover. That just closed my eyes. And that was for two reasons. One, so I could concentrate. And the second reason was so that I couldn't be influenced by what was going on in the room, because of course that's one of the ways that some of the hacks do it. Yeah. And I remember once I was doing some mediumship for this lady. I can't remember what the story was. It doesn't matter. And at the end of it, her daughter came to pick her up. And I could tell her daughter thought the whole thing was just bunkum. She thought my mom, if it makes my mum happy, I'll bring her along to see this guy, this quack. And so we were sat around the table afterwards and just having a slightly friendly chat. And this young girl, she kind of patronizingly asked me some questions about how it all worked, but I could tell she wasn't, she wasn't serious. She just thought, I'll entertain this poor fool, And what she didn't realize was that while I've been chatting to somebody else, I'd been picking up some thoughts that she was having. She was not listening in the conversation. She was somewhere else. And she was thinking about three things in particular, that she hadn't emptied her washing machine. There was a load of washing in it. What she was going to have for dinner and how she was going to pay off an overdraft. I remember that it was so specific. I don't think you could make that stuff up. And so whenever she was asking me these questions, I wove into my answer. I said, sometimes I can pick up what people are thinking, and I gave her the three examples. And I remember her face just hit the floor. She said, I was thinking about those just 2 minutes ago. And I said, I know.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes that one happening can make somebody look at life, like there's so much more going on for them, so much more potential, so much more than they were previously aware of. And that can really set them off on a different trajectory for their own lives, which is what it's all about, isn't it? Yeah. So what made you get into psychology from doing the intuitive work and the healing work?
Yeah, that's it might not seem obvious, I guess. Looking back, even I had to think about that myself, because it's not it's so long ago now as well. This is like 15 plus years ago that I decided to move into psychology. There were a couple of reasons for it. The first reason was, after doing the mediumship work for a while, I realized for some people, it just that one connection is all they need. They can move on with their life.
Yeah.
But other people were developing a dependency on it. And just instinctively, intuitively, it didn't sit well with me. So if I get a message from somebody for the third or fourth time saying, can you connect me with, my mom or whatever, I began to struggle a little bit with that, because I thought, I'm not sure that this is healthy now. And so I began to question that practice, whether it's actually a good thing to do for people. And from an intuition point of view, I realized that a lot of people were treating me a bit like like the old magic 8 balls that we used to have. I don't know if they're still around, where you just shake them and they give you a different answer each time. And what I realized was that people would shake me, and if they didn't like the answer they got, they'd just shake me again until I gave them a different answer. Or if I said, 5 things that they need to think about, they just focused on the one that happened to be convenient and, complemented their existing way of thinking and didn't challenge them in any way. And so I began to pick that up as well. And I began to wonder if helping people in that way was actually helping them, And so I thought maybe what I need to do is go off and do professional training here, to find out how professionals are supposed to help people, and then I can compare notes at the end of it, just to see what I can take from the other kind of practice and kind of blend in, and that was part of the rationale for getting into counselling and psychology. I mean, a lot of it was through the experience of helping friends through tough times and kind of realizing I'd built up some skills with that as well. But that was definitely a big part of it as well. And that's what kind of set me off on the journey into psychology.
Yeah, because you trained as a counsellor initially, didn't you? And then obviously you just kept on with your studies and qualifications till you became a doctor of psychology and practicing doctor of psychology. And I know it was quite a journey as well. It was, I think you said at one point, it's a once in a lifetime undertaking, if you like. It's not something you could do again, or would want to, for that matter, because it's so massive. Like any doctorate, for that matter, not just psychology, whether it's whatever it might be. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. When all's said and done, I mean, it was about a decade of training, and I accelerated some of that as well. So when you add it all up, it's about 14 years worth of training that I did in about 9 or 10 years. So, I mean, no, I don't think you'd be doing that again. Not without a lot of coffee. So, but it was really. I'm so glad I did it. And you'll know from all the emails I sent you over the years, there were a lot of times where it was. But I am glad I did it, because when you're outside psychology looking in it, you think that psychology has the answers to stuff, how the mind works and what's the cause of mental health and all the rest of it. And then you get into it and you realize, oh dear God, they haven't really got a clue. As a profession, it's at the adolescent stage. It is really just a few decades old as a profession, really. So as I often say to the students that I work with now, that when they look back at this era in psychology, I think they'll talk about it the same way we talk about doctors putting leeches on people, back in the medieval times or whatever. It will seem like in a 50 or 100 years, like we really didn't know what we were doing, and that wouldn't be entirely inaccurate, if I'm honest. There's so many gaps in our understanding. Just take counselling, just one of my core professions. We know it helps. People can tell us why it helps, but we have no idea how it helps physiologically, really. Nobody's gone off and done enough research on this. We're going to need to take a bunch of people and stick them into brain scanners to get the answer to that. And that just hasn't been done. And that's partly because that technology has only really been freely available for the last 10 or so years, you know. Up to that point, it was just too expensive to do. So there's so many gaps. So I went into psychology thinking I'd get these kind of packaged answers, you know, and then I progressed through it, constantly waiting for these answers to appear, and then realized there really aren't any. We've got bits of answers, but nothing really complete yet, which is quite scary.
It is, yeah. Do you know, well, I know we've had this conversation before on more than one occasion, but quite often helping somebody is holding a space, actually giving a shit about what they have to say, actually listening, and being interested in getting their world. And that can be transformational. Someone's actually cared enough to listen, ask questions, and actually be engaged, connection. And that's the magic, isn't it? It really is. And you must see that time and again.
Yeah, it is magic. It is magic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a skill I'd love to give away. If I was, you know, allowed to control a curriculum for a few months, I would be teaching, because I did do this for a time. I would train kids with some basic counselling skills, because I think that's one of the best skills that you can give people for their life. That'll help them in just every aspect of their life.
Yeah, you did some work for the BBC as well. I remember seeing you on TV, and it was BBC Ireland or something. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was part of. This is going back to maybe 2 or 3 years ago. There was there was a wave of historical abuse disclosures in my homeland back in Northern Ireland. And it started off with just a few people, and then eventually it became 12, 20, 30, and then up to eventually 60 or 70, something like this. And so, you know, at one point I realized I need to kind of step forward. This is one of my areas of interest academically and as a practitioner. So I thought I have a kind of professional duty to put myself forward and see if I can be of any help in this situation. So that meant I was able to advise some of the journalists kind of working with this, and just to help them understand some of the dynamics of historical abuse, and, for example, why it takes so long for victims to disclose, and to try to bring some professional expertise to that, because in the very early stages, it was a little bit, my concern was that it would lead to a bit of hysteria, you know, where people would start beginning to suspect every Tom, Dick and Harry of potentially being a perpetrator, and you know, there's a lot of popular kind of myths around abuse as well. So I wanted to kind of get in early and try to bring some professional insight to that as best I could. So that meant I did some media work back in those days, indirectly, to try to help explain what was going on to the general public. And I'm really glad I did that, because that's, I think, just in the same way ironically at the time I said, bring in mind this is 2019, at the time I said, if I was a virologist and this was an epidemic, I'd be doing the same thing, you know. And then a year later, of course, COVID arrives, and, you know, every virologist on the planet's in front of a camera. So it's a similar logic. If I think, as a psychologist, if you have a particular area of expertise, and then this to my mind was a public health crisis, basically, the professional duty to step forward and do what I could. So that was, I was glad to be able to help, and in some cases give some. I never worked directly with the victims, but I was able to advise indirectly and do a few things that helped for them.
Good for you and good for them. I've got written down here, David, somewhere to remind me to ask you. You mentioned that many years before your mother passed, if you don't mind talking about it, you were given some kind of etheric training, otherworldly training, which could then help your mother cross. How did that, you know, what was that about, and were you aware of the significance of it at the time?
Yeah, that goes back to, that's like 20 years ago now, I reckon. That was about 2003 or 4, I would say. It was around the time, this kind of booster period, when everything started kind of going into overdrive. I I remember there was one night where I wasn't sleeping. It was this other state. It's really, really hard to describe. Maybe some of the folks listening will have experienced, maybe you've experienced something like this. It's this kind of in-between state. It's very reminiscent. If you remember the old Matrix movie back in '99, do you remember the bit where they go into the computer, into this white room to practice things? It's a little bit like that. So I remember getting taken into this virtual reality dreamlike world. And basically I don't know who it was, they spent the night training me to cope with what it is to be a medium and to have somebody so close to you die. Because my mum and I, like every Irish boy, me and my mum were as close as can be. So that was always going to be one of the hardest losses for me. And so I remember they spent this night training me to how to manage that, both when it happens and then in the aftermath of it. How do you deal with the fact that, if you're a medium, you could close your eyes and talk to your dead mum? I mean, I can promise you there is no psychology textbook for that. So I remember they spent a night training me for that. And I remember the next day I woke up and I just spent a day or two crying because, it was really traumatic. But fast forward 20 years when my mum actually died, and it meant that I was there with her when she died, and it meant that there was this serenity in that moment. Don't get me wrong, I was really, really sad, but I just had this serenity. I can't think of a better word, actually. I knew exactly what I was doing physically and spiritually, and in the days after it, I felt really as grounded as I think you can be in that situation. And now, in the months and years since she's died, I've got the hang of making that connection with her in this new way. And because of that experience, because of that training, if you like to call it that, I don't find that distressing or strange in any way. It just feels natural, like in a way, like picking up the phone and ringing my mum in the old days, except now it's a little bit quicker.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm remembering in this moment when my dad died, I was in the room in the hospital with him when he passed. And I remember reading somebody saying when a loved one dies, don't be in a hurry to go and do something to be up and doing, because there's some kind of beauty and serenity in that, grace in that moment. So I just sat with my dad for maybe 45 minutes, just being, there was some beauty. I can't describe it, and it's so the opposite of what you'd expect. I remember when he died, my sister was like, "God, wait," and she was up and doing, and that was her way of coping, like contacting everybody. And but I just sat there, all peaceful. The hospital staff gave us that time, which I really appreciated. Yeah, but I'm really pleased that you have that connection with your mother from the spirit side. That is a gift.
Yeah. Well, I remember after in those, maybe not immediately after, there were some practical things obviously to attend to, but I remember when, just before I was going to bed, because it was the wee hours of the morning. So when I was finally going to bed at, I don't know, 5 or 5:30 or something, it was dawn, it was spring. And I remember going outside and it was just the most beautiful day. And I remember thinking, if you could pick a day to die, beautiful spring day in Ireland, honestly, there's nowhere nicer. And the sun coming over the hills that she'd worked on. We grew up on a farm, so over the fields that she used to work on when she was younger, the daffodils that she planted blooming. I mean, it was absolutely beautiful. Yeah,
it was. So what's next for David? Do you have any plans that you're happy to share?
Well, what I've been trying to figure out, as you know, for the last few years, Dan, I've been trying to reconcile. I mean, how do I, now that I've kind of done all the psychology training, how do I make everything fit, because they're in general, it's frowned upon in psychology to go around saying that you can talk to dead people and read people's
Yeah, I can
minds and
imagine. You
things like
probably
that.
yourself.
So it'd be that's good. That's quite a controversial thing to say. Although I say that jokingly, but ironically, over the years I've met a number of people in the profession who confess to such practices. I've even had a counsellor 10 or so years ago who was intuitive and used that with me, which was really interesting. He kind of modeled how it could be done, and I have done some of that with people, but it is obviously tricky. Some people don't want that stuff, they it's not for them. They don't want the woo. So that's absolutely fine. But what I've been trying to figure out is how I can blend them together. And I used to think that challenge was for me, that it was my job to somehow make those things go together. And then I realized in more recent times, I don't need to worry about that. I just need to turn up and say, here's what I can offer. And if somebody wants it, there you go. I don't need to somehow fuse these things together to make one more palatable to the other, or because some people are going to want that, and it is going to be useful for some people. When I've done some sessions where I've used that kind of intuition with people, and you can get information that's just not possible otherwise, and it can also speed the process along a little bit sometimes. So I think I'd like to get back into that clinical work at some point. I haven't been able to for a variety of reasons, including COVID in recent years. So I would like to get back into that clinical work, but I will be weaving that intuition into it properly and without without trying to Photoshop it, to make it look like something it isn't, and I'll be pretty upfront about that. And the other thing that I want to do is write, because this is probably of all the things that I do, that's my favorite thing. I'm pretty good at communicating sometimes quite complex psychological concepts to the general public. So I think I'd like to do a little bit more of that. I have done some in recent years. I've also been obviously doing a lot of academic writing for a specialist audience, but what my real passion is writing for everyone, not just some 20 psychologists who are interested in what I'm doing, what I'm researching. So I've got a few ideas in the pipeline. One of the things I'm working on, which is kind of drawing on just the mediumship that I've been talking about, the fact I worked in a hospice for a couple of years as a psychologist, which was an incredible experience, and obviously my own experience with my parents. One of the things I'm working on is a book which I've nicknamed "Get Ready to Die," which is basically, I guess that name might change by the time it's published. I don't think it's going to sell very much like that, but in my head, that's essentially what it is: a handbook to help people get ready to die. Because one of the things I realized, because of where I grew up, as I said earlier, because of where and when I grew up, death was all around, and it just didn't have the same grip over me. In Ireland in general, we're quite comfortable with death. As you know, as an Irishman yourself, that in Ireland we're quite comfortable with death, and the Troubles really, accentuated that. So that's true for me too. And then obviously with the other professional and non-professional skills that I have, it has an even it gives me an even different, a much more very different perspective, let's say, on it. So what I want to do is combine all of that to help people who are not necessarily people who've been given some horrible diagnosis and told you're on borrowed time. I think we should all, no matter what age we are, all adults should be thinking about death and getting their shit together, basically, for that. Because if you don't, one of the things that, when I think back to the hospice, one of the things that practically every person said to me was, I don't want to be a burden to my kids. Well, the truth is, if you don't get your shit together for the moment when you die, you are going to be a burden to your kids then, So the more that you can do, and the earlier that you can do it, one, it's better for you because you can concentrate on either continuing to be well or trying to battle whatever condition it is that you have. And it's also it's better for your family because whenever you do die, you're not leaving them with, rummaging around in the filing cabinet trying to figure out where you banked or where your pension documents are stored and things like this. So that's one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, which is that's quite personal as well because of my experience with my parents.
Yeah, I bet. A couple of things I wanted to sort of pick up on. You mentioned about having all these skill sets. It's a bit like having a toolkit. You go to a job with your metaphorical toolkit. You get whatever tool is most appropriate for that particular job in that moment with that person. And the other thing that I was thinking about was I was doing one of these live streams a few days ago, whatever it was, and I think before we went live, the person I was talking to was saying that a lot of people who do this work, whether it's healing or whatever it might be, they can absorb the energy and they're not doing their own energy practice suitably, and they can end up becoming ill or dying sooner than they should do. And I thought about that, and I thought all the people who do this work, they've either died early or they've had a life-threatening disease. And I thought, oh, right here, that's something maybe to pay attention to if you're doing this work. Don't neglect your own mental health, your own physical health. If you're not in the right place yourself, and I know you've done this to you as well, withdraw yourself and say, I need to work on my own grief. I need to work on my own whatever it might be, break up of a relationship, etc., etc. That's just a couple of examples. Yeah, and I think that's important to have somebody to go to for your own healing support. Yeah.
I think that's when I think about how that works in professional practice. I mean, that's one of the reasons why every counsellor and practitioner psychologist will have clinical supervision, because I mean, that is at times that can be your life raft. You can be working with some really difficult client material, and you might be going through a difficult time yourself as well in your personal life, and you need to have that support. You absolutely need it. And if I look back, and at times when I think back to how that's worked for me, the really, really difficult times, I've increased that. Instead of, it's usually every month for maybe an hour and a half, something like that. And at the most stressful times, I'll increase that to at times weekly, if that's what I need, to make sure that I keep myself afloat. I mean, I keep thinking of the Hippocratic Oath, physician, heal thyself. Yeah. I'm no good to somebody else if I'm a mess. Yeah. That's the bottom line. So that's why that's one of the professional support structures that I have in place. One of the reasons why I take care of diet and lifestyle and sleep and my own, meditation and general, let's call it mental hygiene. And the other thing, and this is it's one of those things that's maybe, if I could send a message back in time to myself 15 years ago or 20 years ago, this is one of the things I wish I'd been a bit better at, is being a bit more discerning about the company that I keep, the friends that I keep, because one of the things that you realize, if you have something to offer, whether if you're an energy healer, you're a psychologist, a counselor, whatever, sometimes you attract people who like you for that. Yeah. And they like the fact that they've got a psychologist on call, and I've had a few friends over the years, sadly, and very slowly, in my case, come to realize that's what they were in friendship with me for, and that's a tough thing to realize after you've been a friend with somebody in some cases for years. But it's very, very important you learn that lesson. So what I've come to think of is that one of the things I say is that relationships should have a certain symmetry to them, both the kinds of things we disclose to each other, they should be roughly the same type of thing, the same kind of depth, but also the same kind of function that we play for each other. And like over the years, we've had the same kind of role for each other, where we've had each other's back on our spiritual development stuff, and so when you are in the helping professions, whatever label you give yourself, when you look around at the people in your life, do ask yourself critically, what is it that they're putting back into my life? You know, is there symmetry in this relationship, basically? And if there isn't, maybe you want to think about that.
Yeah, amen to that. Yeah, I can totally relate and agree with every word you just said. Just wondered if you have any closing thoughts, Dr. David Morrison.
The only person who uses that title is the tax man. And, or if somebody wants something, they'll use it. So I was thinking about, just as you said that, my mind went back to because one of the things, if you ever speak to somebody who's been in the helping professions for a little too long and maybe a little burned out, it could kind of feel like it's just helping people just takes. And I've not had that experience, if I'm honest with you, because it's given me whatever it's taken. It's given me at least twice as much, and I've learned so much from the people I've worked with as a psychologist, as an empath, as a medium. And I remember one of my favorite stories was when I was helping this lady who had lost a baby not long after birth, or just an absolutely tragic story. The baby was only minutes or hours old. I can't remember now. And she'd asked me if I could, connect her with her child, and I was able to. And this young child talked so much about how important that it was, maybe 20 minutes from memory, just that's 20 minutes that they had together. How for this child, it was like a lifetime for them. It was just the equivalent of a full 76 3 score and 10, Yeah. It was just as valuable to them. And that just blew my mind, the idea that 20 minutes could be enough for one soul, you don't actually have to live 70 minutes. And I remember they explained this to me, because I was genuinely confused. Like, how can you say that 20 minutes is enough? And they said, well, you just don't understand, because you're stuck in this linear time. But from his point of view, this little child's point of view, he could go back into any one of those moments and stay there for as long as they wanted. So that 20 minutes suddenly became an infinite amount of time. And that blew my mind. It still blows my mind thinking about it, because we all have lives like that. Some of us are lucky enough to live a lot longer than 20 minutes. Some of us get into our 40s and 50s and beyond. But from that moment onwards, I had a much deeper appreciation for the time that I have. And I keep saying to friends, it sounds really morbid, but then, you kind of expect that from me, particularly, if a guy's going to write a book about getting ready to die, then, but, I keep saying to friends that I would, if you said to me, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow, that's it, my time's over, I wouldn't be, well, yeah, I'd be a bit pissed off, if I'm honest, but I'd look back at the 45 years I've had and say, I'm happy with that. I've put it to good use, I think. And I wouldn't be thinking in that way if I hadn't had that experience with that little child.
What a beautiful note to end this live stream on. It's been wonderful to connect. It's been a fantastic way to spend an hour. And I know we've had people on most of the way through it. And if you're watching this retrospectively on replay, do leave your comments, your thoughts, questions for David, and what you thought. And thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for agreeing to do this wonderful live stream, David.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Years in the making.
And bye for now, everyone. Till the next one.